Now, I'm going to begin today with a claim that is not testable, so I am treading with caution and saying this in a very non-authoritative way. But I do wonder if the tide is just starting to change a little bit when it comes to the gas tax. Now, don't get me wrong, obviously it is still overwhelmingly popular to go ahead with a 25% export tax, but I do wonder if it is starting to change just a little bit, and there's a little bit more restraint that a lot of people who are supporters of the tax are starting to feel around the commentary surrounding the tax. So obviously, more people support it than don't. It's become this overwhelmingly popular issue. It's, you could argue it's a populist policy that's got approval from both, reactionary right and reactionary left, reactionary against the major parties. But I feel it's lost a little bit of steam in these last couple of days. And there's a couple of reasons why. Firstly, this is not an attempt to be self-congratulatory. As far as I know, I'm the only person that's not Sky News that has put a bit of content out here saying, look, here's an alternative approach. Go watch my video on that. For very different reasons to Sky News, let's put it that way. There will be more coming soon, don't get me wrong, from one or two other commentators. But I don't think that's real. Like, that's a drop in the ocean. I don't really think that's changed that many people's perspective on the actual gas tax itself. However, I think a lot of the hum-ha and the commentary around implementing this tax is starting to put people offside just a little bit. And it does come to a principle that is pretty observable. I've just done a couple of examples, some very recent, some a little bit more in the rearview mirror as you go through Australian history, where we see the concept of actually overcooking what was once a winnable issue when you start to become undisciplined or start to lose any sense of restraint around how you talk about this issue. And so with the gas tax, I reckon the main thing that I'm noticing is the fact now, again, the point of this video isn't to be an evangelist for not doing the tax. You can see my reasons why in the video I put up. And then Sloan Zone did a video the other day where he was curious. He's like, I wonder just what the reasons are for not doing this. It was very much from a curious point of view, not an accusatory point of view. And so you can go to his video. I left a comment with my arguments against the sovereign wealth fund that you can have a read for yourself. Anyway, the thing that I reckon I'm noticing is that the commentary is becoming a little bit dirty. And commentary around Albo is going beneath the belt a little bit. The main thing that I reckon I saw, that they had a huge win of, massive popular consensus around doing this gas tax. And then it led to, saying 25% gas tax is a good policy, that's one thing. Saying that Albo is bought and sold by the gas lobby is another. And yeah, it might get a lot of popularity on Instagram in terms of clips and comments or whatever, because, insert corrupt politician is corrupt, or, insert politician is pro-Israel, whatever you want to put in there always rises to the top of any comment section. And I'm just sensing a slight sense of, actually, mate, I don't know. I think you're kind of getting carried away about this one. So for the reason why people are saying Alba was bought and sold by the gas lobby is that he used AEP numbers, Australian energy providers, producers, providers, whatever, gas lobby, very much a collection of gas companies that fund their organization there. They did a survey of the different taxes that gas companies paid, and they've put that forward and said we've paid $21.9 billion in tax to the government. Albo has then used that number and said they pay $21.5 billion, and then people are like, you're getting your numbers from the gas lobby. Why are you not producing government data from the ATO or from Treasury? And if you actually break the numbers down, there is no synthesis that has all the gas tax together apart from the AEP. But we do have 70% of the picture from government documents. We can go through the ATO and we can see corporate tax, PRRT. We can go through the state treasuries and see what each of the states were paid in royalties. And based on the 70% that we do have, it gets us to about nearly $15 billion. And so no, Alba isn't then exaggerating by $6.5 billion, because out of that extra $6 billion, there are all these other taxes that don't get divided by sector composition. So you look at things like payroll tax, you look at things like stamp duty, all these state taxes that these companies pay that aren't substantial enough to get their own sector division in taxation data or in treasury data. And then you add on top of that, you've got the petroleum excise. And we don't, in terms of government documents, we know that it increased by $3.4 billion from the 22-23 financial year to the 23-24 financial year. But in the government documents, they don't actually list what the petroleum excise net revenue was, gross revenue was coming in. And so because of that, we actually don't have all that data available. And so the only, our next option for getting that data is actually going to the Australian energy providers and going, hey, what do you, we like our government documents aren't able to divide this by sector, so we need to ask you what your contribution was, and then we are using that. And if you match up the 70% of the pictures that we do have, it matches up quite closely with the AEP. The only noticeable difference is on corporate tax, and that is just because in the transparency report for the Australian Taxation Office, there are gas companies that they don't have to include in that. The AEP includes these guys in the survey. The difference was something like $2 billion. So I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the AEP is saying paid $12 billion in corporate tax. The corporate tax report suggests $10 billion, but that $2 billion actually is quite explainable in of itself. Now, these are all available, but there's no synthesis of all this data together. So the AEP is the only synthesis of this data. Anyway, so when Albo used the $21.5 billion, he technically wasn't wrong. Well, not technically, he just wasn't wrong in using that number. As far as we can see, that is a believable number, and it is the only synthesis of the data that we have available. Anyway, so because of that, it's leading to things like, oh, Albo's a gas lobbyist, he's going to end up becoming a gas lobbyist when he finishes and retires from politics. It's like, okay, man, like, the boy from Camperdown, becomes prime minister, says the Rabbitohs, and decides, I'm gonna go work for the gas lobby. Come on, man. I think a lot of people that are very pro going ahead with this tax, and I think there are certainly merits to going ahead with it. I don't think those merits are strong enough to watch the video for yourself to see my argument. But a lot of people that are very supportive of this tax are thinking, man, come on, this is just going a bit far. You're getting a bit carried away here, and in doing so, you're actually undermining your credibility. I'm with you with the original point. You don't need to add all of this extra mayo to make your point. It really just undermines the credibility. And it really is a common thread that you see throughout Australian politics. I'm going to use a very another recent example right now. Chocky would have been okay. He could have kept living his best life with the siloed, cordoned off part of Instagram that he has corded for himself. And he could have just kind of kept that circular motion going. But he went after Friendly Geordies and he attacked him on Benjamin Robert Smith, which then irked the ire of Friendly Geordies, which if you've watched any of his videos, you know no one has ever won that battle before, except for Marcus Paul, because he swam with the tide and recognized defeat early on and embraced it. But it was a very naive move on Chocky's part. We're talking about the big guns of Australian politics here: Harold Holt, Campbell Newman, Julia Gillard, and Big Chocky. But he overcooked it. Like the Benjamin Robert Smith, it was a winning issue amongst his contingent. I would argue does not require that much critical thought. Like the arguments that were being put forward were like, he put on the uniform. How could we turn our back on a guy who put on the uniform? And so not much critical thought was required. But then he irked someone who, you agree with them, disagree with them. Obviously, it's no secret that I'm a huge fan, but each to their own. What you can't accuse Friendly Geordies of is lacking critical thinking skills in his commentary, and irked the ire of someone who has not only has critical thinking skills, but has an audience very capable of critical thinking as well. And now they have gone after Chocky. If you go on his recent Instagram reels, he's doing things like talking about David McBride, reading like one paragraph of a Wikipedia article and going, I've got a huge expose. He's just completely imploded a huge, like he'll obviously have some audience for quite some time. And usually if you're in the right wing side of things, people have short memories and you can pop up a little bit later on and emerge scot-free. But he has really tanked himself in the last couple of days, and he basically overplayed his hand. He had a winning hand. You just had to keep serving that on your platter to your current demographic, but he overplayed what he thought was a winning issue, and I think he's been put in his place, quite frankly. I think we started to see a similar thing with One Nation of, just like anti-migration. It was going really strong from the middle of 2025, really surged around Bondi and was strong to begin with this year. But I think it's starting to also taper off just a little bit. We've seen the decline in One Nation's polls. And honestly, if they did not have Barnaby Joyce, I think they would be far more up the creek than what they are. And I think I would hazard a guess that they would almost be in decline up until the next election. Barnaby is way too smart to let that happen. He is able to pivot quite well. And he's very much able to recognize when they have overcooked an issue. And so actually, like if you looked at his interviews when One Nation's polling dipped, he was actually very straightforward as to why that had happened with the One Nation campaign director for the 2025 election. He actually didn't weasel his way out of the question. And you can tell he's trying to bring in a whole other plethora of issues, and particularly being a vocal critic of the Labor government's energy policy and bringing a bit more expertise on energy. Obviously, I'd argue he does. His argument for our energy future is not in our national interest, but he's very good at arguing the case, and is bringing energy to the table and is diversifying their array of issues. And he's also a bit more careful not to overdo the stuff migrants stick. You watch him go about his thing. He's way more disciplined at a message and knows when to exert enough control over a message to get the results, but then to cash out before you lose all of your value and all your capital. And you really can. I'm trying to get ones from all across the political spectrum, because obviously this is not an issue that Labor is immune from. They've committed this sin plenty of times themselves. Harold Holt is probably one of the best older examples that I can think of. So you have Menzies, who brought us into Vietnam. Then you have Harold Holt, who sold Vietnam perhaps far more effectively than Robert Menzies did. And the proof for that was that he won the 1966 election really convincingly, when it was basically made to be a referendum on Vietnam against Arthur Colwell. Biggest election majority in history at that point. But it came back to bite him quite heavily in 1967. You've got the conspiracy that, because Vietnam had gone so south and Harold Holt's political standing internally within the Liberal Party had diminished so badly that, he was rather reckless in going for the swim in Portsea that day, because quite frankly, he didn't care if if he were to die, it would take him away from his current circumstances. It's Gough Whitlam has actually spoken about that. And in Troy Brampton's book about Gough Whitlam, Whitlam actually entertains that as a possibility if his judgment was severely impaired because of the political pressure that he was under. Anyway, the Vietnam War, it was popular in the beginning, but as soon as they started overselling what the war is actually about, again, initially, stop the spread of communism, very good, like strategically really important, and domino effect, all that sort of stuff. Then when LBJ rocks up in Australia and talks about letting freedom reign, rather than just preventing a bad thing from happening, this is a good thing, we're bringing liberty to the world, the kind of usual neocon talking points that would become quite popular under George Bush, he massively oversells his hand and promises something that could never be delivered upon. And for the Australian public, there was just a large awareness of, look, no one is this war was popular in the beginning, we're in it long enough, we know that this is not really what it's about. And we agree, you had a point in the beginning, but quite frankly, we think you're overselling it. Julia Gillard, probably the carbon tax is the best example that I could think of, where under Kevin Rudd, mass support and mass consensus had been built around putting a price on carbon. Obviously, his model of the ETS doesn't get up. And then Julia Gillard implements her model of ETS, which has a fixed price on carbon at the beginning before becoming before becoming just a market. And so the really naive move on Julia Gillard's part, which is like, look, there is still public consensus around introducing a carbon tax or putting a price on carbon. This is a wave that the Greens had ridden quite well going into the 2010 election. There is mass support for putting a price on carbon. It is not an issue if we call this a carbon tax, because for 5 years, I think it was 5. 3 was it 3 years or 5? Whatever it was. This is effectively a tax because we're putting a fixed price on carbon. And her concession that this was a carbon tax was ultimately one of the biggest biggest own goals that she could have scored. Free hit given to Tony Abbott, and Tony Abbott took her to town on it, and used the language of tax against her quite well. Again, there was consensus around the fact that we should put a price on carbon. As soon as she went as far as calling it a carbon tax, she undermined a lot of her own political standing and gave a lot of ammo to Tony Abbott to use against her, I should say. It's interesting, if you watch Bob Carr's interview with Friendly Geordies, one of the rather insightful comments that Bob Carr makes is that this was the early days of Chris Minns, well before, obviously I imagine the Palestine issue has created some pretty big divide between Chris Minns and Bob Carr right now, but in the first year or two of Chris Minns, Bob Carr was saying Chris Minns was way better than me in his first term because I would give too much to answer the question. Chris Minns is good at not giving more than is needed to answer the question and giving ammunition to his political opponents. We even saw this with his approach to handling Gladys Berejiklian. There was a lot that he could have used, but he didn't use that much of it. And in doing so, I think he could have rightfully spoken about every regrettable action that happened between Gladys and Darren Maguire and all the codes of conduct that were breached in her relationship. But by doing so, it actually risked a lot of the Australian public going, yeah, we know she did the wrong thing, but come on, man, like don't kick her while she's down. And he was wise enough to read the room on that one and to not risk that being a thing that could be used against him. And then obviously Gladys stepped down, which solved that thing for him. But you get the picture. Campbell Newman would be another example. Ironically, so Anna Bligh lost if you don't know the context of Queensland politics, she was in during the GFC, and they went into debt to combat the GFC. And one of the solutions to handling the financial consequences of big amounts of debt spending was by selling off government assets. A lot of the own Labor base turns against it for that. There was an issue with health workers going unpaid as well. So another sect of Labor voters voted against Anna Bligh. Campbell Newman gets in, and ironically, his solution is to continue the privatisation, but do it at a much grander scale. And the sort of popular wave that Campbell Newman had ridden was fix the debt, restore our credit rating. And so he thought he had a mandate to do pretty much anything he wanted to restore the credit rating of the Queensland government, which involved, I think, something like 14,000 public servant layoffs, something ridiculous like that. And that tipped people over the edge, and he was a one-term premier and was booted out in 2015. And so he thought he was riding that wave of like, boo Labor, terrible economic managers, boo Labor, too much debt. And then he rode that wave too hard and he ended up too far from shore. That doesn't work because the wave is supposed to take you into shore, not away from shore. That's a terrible analogy now that I think about it. But you get the point. With the gas tax, I wonder if a lot of the critics of Labor's approach to handling its gas taxation policy are overplaying their hand right now. The wind is blowing in their favour right now, but it won't forever. And I wonder if a lot of the Australian public are starting to think, or not, like, you know, a growing number of this, growing percentage of the Australian public are starting to think, man, look, I'm pro-tax, but I think this is getting taken too far. And I think, I saw a great comment on Reddit that was like, why is Ozpol acting like this is top 10 anime betrayals? There might be that sentiment of we're blowing this way out of proportion here. And I thought you had an original point, you're taking this too far. And the history of Ozpol is that often coming back to bite you. And so if you're in politics, very careful. Once the wind starts blowing in once you've got the wind in your sails, sometimes it actually is wise to show a little bit of restraint. Yeah, I hate to give him grace again. This is the second video I'm giving Chris Minns, the hardest to like Labor figure I can think of in any of the jurisdictions. At least, for someone who's a true believer as such. But it is definitely Chris Minns' strategy is definitely one that has been proven to be quite effective. Hi there. I'm Cam, and I have a YouTube channel with over 5 million views on Australian political history. And at the end of 2025, I built a program that, as we speak, is helping people get chosen to be candidates for the Labor Party. Let me tell you how. For starters, it covers the entire Labor history of the major states. Each state has like 2 books available on their Labor history, but thankfully I could get my hands on them and make easy to digest modules so that my students have the ultimate perspective of the party they're in and why certain policies worked and others just didn't. You can quiz yourself at any point to check your understanding. But the Barton Academy is much more than just a lecture hall. It's a classroom with legends across all the states that are helping people get connected and meet other people in the Labor machine. Others are giving each other feedback on their motions, and some are even helping others get beers with sitting politicians. So couple a well-connected person with someone who has actual perspective on the history of their party and the challenges that they faced, and you get this. Since 1909, our parties have been divided over one battle line. The party that thinks that unions should have a role in making decisions, and a coalition of others who think that the unions simply don't belong at the governing table. If you want to grow in influence so that you can shape that very union party, I think that I might be able to help. Click this link right here to apply to join the Barton Academy. I'll get back to you pretty quickly.